This is the story of Abigail of Carmel and how she stopped a war with nothing more than a meal and the courage to act. But to really understand what she did, we need to go back to ancient Israel, to a time when the land was wild, dangerous, and ruled by whoever had the strongest sword. 3,000 years ago, the land of Israel was very different from today. There were no big cities like we know them, no police forces, no courts of law that everyone respected. Instead, the countryside was dotted with small settlements, sheep farms, and nomadic camps. And in this rough landscape, survival meant you either protected yourself or you found someone strong enough to protect you. This was the world of King David. But here's the thing. When our story takes place, David wasn't king yet. He was actually a fugitive, running from King Saul who wanted him dead. David had started with just a few loyal friends, but word spread about this charismatic young man who could fight like a lion and inspire fierce loyalty. Soon, he had 400 men following him through the wilderness. These weren't Boy Scouts on a camping trip. These were hardened fighters, outlaws, men who had nothing left to lose. They lived rough, slept under the stars, and survived by their wits and their swords. But here's what made David different from other outlaw leaders. He had rules. His men weren't allowed to attack innocent people. They couldn't steal from farmers or travelers. Instead, they offered protection services. Think of it like this. Imagine you're a sheep farmer 3,000 years ago. You have hundreds of valuable animals grazing in fields far from your home. Bandits roam the hills looking for easy targets. Wild animals prowl at night. Raiders from enemy tribes make surprise attacks. What do? Well, if you were smart, you hired David and his men. They would camp near your flocks. Their scouts would watch the hills. Their fighters would drive off any threats. In return, you would provide them with food, supplies, and payment. It was like having a private security company, except instead of modern equipment, they had swords, spears, and incredible courage. One of the wealthiest men who benefited from this arrangement was named Nabal. He owned 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. That made him incredibly rich by ancient standards. His flocks grazed in the area around Carmel, a region known for its good pastures and fresh springs. And for months, David's men had been protecting Nabal's animals like they were their own. But there was a problem with Nabal. His name actually means fool in Hebrew, and apparently, he lived up to it. The Bible describes him as harsh and evil in his dealings. He was the kind of rich man who thought his wealth made him better than everyone else. The kind of person who would take your help when he needed it, then pretend he didn't know you when it came time to pay. Now, Nabal was married to a woman named Abigail. And if Nabal was known for being foolish and harsh, Abigail was famous for being intelligent and beautiful. But more than that, she was wise. She understood people. She could see the bigger picture when others got lost in their anger or pride. And she was about to need every bit of that wisdom, because her husband was about to make a decision that would put hundreds of lives at risk. The time of year was significant too. It was sheep shearing season, a time of celebration and prosperity. After months of hard work, the wool harvest was in. It was like a combination of payday, harvest festival, and Christmas morning all rolled into one. Wealthy sheep owners like Nabal would throw big parties. They would feast with their workers, pay their debts, and share their good fortune. This was the perfect time for David to approach Nabal for payment. His men had worked hard protecting those flocks. They had earned their reward. And according to all the customs of the time, Nabal owed them big time. But as we'll see, Nabal had other ideas. And his foolish pride was about to light a fuse that would lead straight to disaster. David chose 10 of his best men for the mission to Nabal. These weren't random soldiers. They were his most trusted fighters, men who could speak well and represent him with dignity. He gave them careful instructions about how to approach Nabal with respect and courtesy. The message they carried was perfectly reasonable. David reminded Nabal of how his men had protected the sheep and shepherds. Not one animal had been stolen while David's forces were in the area. The shepherds had been able to work safely, day and night. David had essentially provided free security services for months. Now, during this time of celebration and prosperity, he was asking for fair compensation. The request was polite. David didn't demand specific amounts. He didn't threaten. He simply asked Nabal to give whatever he thought was appropriate for the services provided. In that culture, this was not only reasonable, it was expected. When someone protected your property and livelihood, you honored them during good times. But when David's men found Nabal, they discovered he was already deep into his celebration feast. Wine was flowing. Rich food covered the tables. Nabal was surrounded by his workers and guests, feeling important and powerful in front of his audience. The young men delivered David's message exactly as instructed. They spoke respectfully. They reminded Nabal of their service. They asked for fair payment during this time of prosperity. Nabal's response was stunning in its cruelty and stupidity. He looked around at his guests to make sure everyone was watching, then delivered one of the most insulting rejections in ancient history. "Who is David?" he sneered. "Who is this son of Jesse? There are many servants nowadays who break away from their masters. Why should I take my bread and water and meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men I don't even know?" Every word was calculated to be as offensive as possible. First, by asking, "Who is David?" Nabal pretended not to know the famous warrior who was already legendary throughout Israel. Everyone knew who David was, the man who killed Goliath, the hero who led Saul's armies to victory after victory before becoming a fugitive. Then Nabal called David a runaway servant. This was incredibly insulting. David wasn't some escaped slave. He was a proven leader with hundreds of loyal followers. But Nabal wanted to humiliate him in front of witnesses. Finally, Nabal claimed he didn't know David's men, even though they had been protecting his property for months. He pretended they were strangers trying to trick him, rather than the guards who had kept his wealth safe. David's messengers returned with this insulting response. They delivered Nabal's exact words to David and his 400 men. You can imagine the reaction. These were hardened warriors who had risked their lives protecting Nabal's flocks. They had gone without food while guarding his property. They had faced wild animals and raiders to keep his sheep safe. And now Nabal had publicly humiliated them, calling them nobodies and refusing to pay what he owed. David's response was swift and decisive. "Every man strap on his sword," he commanded. Within minutes, 400 angry warriors were armed and ready for battle. David left 100 men to guard their camp and supplies, then led 300 fighters toward Nabal's property. This wasn't going to be a negotiation. This wasn't going to be a peaceful discussion. David was bringing overwhelming force to settle the matter permanently. In his mind, Nabal had declared war with his insults. Now David would finish it. As the armed column marched through the wilderness toward Carmel, David made a terrible oath. "May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him." David was planning to kill every man and boy connected to Nabal. Not just Nabal himself, but his sons, his servants, his workers, every male in his household. It would be a massacre that would echo through the region for generations. The stage was set for tragedy. 400 experienced warriors were marching toward a sheep farm. The element of surprise was on their side. Nabal's people had no idea what was coming. In a few hours, there would be blood in the fields around Carmel. But someone was watching. Someone who understood both the justice of David's anger and the horror that was about to unfold. Someone who was already forming a plan to stop a war before it could begin. One of Nabal's young servants had witnessed the entire confrontation. He saw how Nabal insulted David's messengers. He knew how David's men had faithfully protected the flocks, and he understood immediately that disaster was coming. This servant was smart enough to know that talking to Nabal would be useless. When his master got drunk and angry, reasoning with him was impossible. But the servant also knew there was one person in the household who might be able to fix this mess: Nabal's wife, Abigail. He found her quickly and delivered the news with urgent, breathless words. "David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day they were a wall around us the whole time we were herding our sheep near them." The servant was painting a clear picture. David's men hadn't just provided casual protection. They had been like a fortress wall around Nabal's operation. The phrase "night and day they were a wall around us" shows how constant and reliable their protection had been. But then came the terrifying conclusion. "Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him." The servant was basically saying, "Your husband just signed all of our death warrants, and he's too stubborn to fix it. You're our only hope." Abigail didn't waste time arguing or trying to find her husband to change his mind. She had lived with Nabal long enough to know that once he made a decision in anger and pride, he would stick to it even if it killed him. And in this case, it might kill everyone around him too. Instead, Abigail immediately began preparing what might be the most important meal in human history. But this wasn't just any meal. This was a feast fit for an army. She was going to feed 400 hungry, angry warriors, and she was going to do it in a way that showed tremendous respect and honor. Here's what she gathered: 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep ready for cooking, 5 measures of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs. This was enough food to feed David's entire force with plenty left over. It was also exactly the kind of payment that David should have received in the first place. But Abigail knew that simply sending food wouldn't be enough. David was coming for blood, not bread. She needed to meet him personally, to speak to him face to face, to somehow convince him that mercy was better than revenge. Loading all this food onto donkeys, Abigail prepared for the most dangerous journey of her life. She was about to ride out alone into the wilderness to confront 400 armed and angry men. She was going to throw herself on the mercy of a warrior who had just sworn to kill every male in her household. And she didn't tell her husband what she was doing. Think about the courage this took. Abigail knew that if her plan failed, she would probably die along with everyone else. If it succeeded, but Nabal found out she had gone behind his back, he might kill her himself for the humiliation. She was risking everything on her ability to change the mind of a man famous for his skill in battle and his fierce loyalty to his followers. As Abigail rode out from her home, she had no guarantee that David would even listen to her. For all she knew, he might kill her on sight as part of Nabal's household. She was betting her life on the hope that the man who had once spared King Saul's life in a cave might be willing to show mercy again. The food was just the beginning of her plan. The real weapon she was bringing was something much more powerful than bread and wine. She was bringing words, carefully chosen, brilliantly crafted words that would appeal to David's sense of justice, his future as king, and his relationship with God. But first, she had to survive the meeting. She had to get close enough to speak before David's men could react. She had to time everything perfectly, approaching David at just the right moment in just the right way. As her small caravan of servants and pack animals wound its way through the rocky hills toward the approaching army, Abigail was probably rehearsing the speech of her lifetime. Because in a few minutes, she would have one chance to save hundreds of lives with nothing but words and food. One chance to stop a war before it started. The collision between mercy and vengeance happened in a narrow valley between rocky hills. David and his 300 warriors were marching hard, their weapons ready, their faces grim with purpose. They had been insulted, cheated, and humiliated. Justice demanded blood, and they were coming to collect it. At the same time, from the opposite direction, came Abigail with her small group of servants and pack animals loaded with food. Two forces converging on the same point, but with completely different intentions. Abigail saw them first. 300 armed men moving like a storm cloud across the landscape. At their head rode David himself, probably wearing the sword that had once belonged to Goliath, his face set with determination and anger. These were not men who had come to negotiate. What happened next required incredible courage. Instead of turning back or sending a servant ahead to announce her, Abigail rode directly toward the armed column. She approached David himself, the man who had sworn to kill every male in her household by morning. And then she did something that no one expected. She got down from her donkey and bowed face down on the ground before David. This wasn't just politeness. This was the position of complete surrender. She was throwing herself entirely on his mercy, acknowledging his power and authority while putting her life in his hands. But Abigail didn't stay silent in her submission. Instead, she launched into one of the most brilliant speeches in recorded history. Every word was chosen perfectly. Every argument was crafted to hit David exactly where it would have the most impact. She started by taking all the blame on herself. "My lord, let the blame be on me alone. Please let your servant speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him." This was genius. Instead of defending her husband or making excuses for him, she agreed that he had acted foolishly. She didn't ask David to forgive Nabal's insults. Instead, She asked him to ignore them entirely and focus on her. Then she said something that must have stopped David cold. "I, your servant, did not see the men my lord sent." She was explaining that she hadn't been part of the insult. If she had been there, she would have received David's messengers with honor and given them what they deserved. The implication was clear: Nabal's rudeness didn't represent everyone in his household. Next came the food. "Now since the Lord has restrained you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my lord be like Nabal. And let this gift, which your servant has brought to my lord, be given to the men who follow you." Look at how clever this was. She presented the food not as payment for past services, but as a gift for David's men. She acknowledged that David had been restrained by God from taking revenge, suggesting that showing mercy would be the divine choice. And she lumped all of David's real enemies together with Nabal, implying that foolish people weren't worth his time or attention. But then Abigail played her strongest card. She reminded David of his destiny. "Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my lord, because you fight the Lord's battles, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live." She was reminding him that he was destined to be king, that his reputation mattered, that history would remember how he handled this situation. Did he want to be remembered as the future king who massacred a household over an insult, or as the leader who showed mercy and wisdom? She continued, "Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God, but the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling." This was a brilliant reference to David's most famous victory. When he killed Goliath, he used a simple sling to defeat the giant. Now Abigail was saying that just as God had protected David then, God would continue to protect him. His enemies would be dealt with by divine power, not human revenge. Finally, she delivered the knockout punch. "When the Lord has fulfilled for my lord every good thing he promised concerning him and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself." She was asking David to think about his future self. When he was king, when he was old and looking back on his life, would he be proud of this moment? Would he want to remember the day he killed innocent people because of one man's foolishness? David stood there, surrounded by his armed men, listening to this woman who had risked everything to save her household. The food she had brought was more than generous. It was exactly what he and his men deserved for their service. Her words were wise, respectful, and compelling. But more than that, her courage was extraordinary. She had done what no one else dared to do. She had stepped between an army and its target, armed with nothing but wisdom, generosity, and faith. David's response showed just how deeply her words had affected him. David looked at this brave woman kneeling before him, and something powerful shifted in his heart. The anger that had been driving him for hours began to cool. The thirst for revenge that had seemed so righteous began to feel less certain. His response to Abigail revealed the true character of the man who would become Israel's greatest king. "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me," David said. "May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands." Think about what David was saying here. He was admitting that Abigail had saved him from making a terrible mistake. This wasn't just about saving Nabal's household. It was about saving David from becoming a murderer of innocent people. David continued, "Otherwise, as surely as the Lord the God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak." This was David acknowledging just how close he had come to disaster. He had been completely committed to his plan of revenge. Nothing would have stopped him except what Abigail had just done, meeting him with wisdom, respect, and generosity. But David's response went even deeper than just accepting her gift and calling off the attack. He saw something special in Abigail herself. Her courage, her wisdom, her ability to see the bigger picture. These were exactly the qualities David valued most in people. "Go home in peace," David told her. "I have heard your words and granted your request." With those simple words, the war was over before it began. 400 warriors put away their swords. The march toward massacre became a march toward home. Lives were saved, reputations were preserved, and justice was served, not through bloodshed, but through wisdom and mercy. But David's choice in that moment revealed something profound about leadership and character. A lesser man might have been too proud to change his mind, especially in front of his followers. A weaker leader might have worried that showing mercy would make him look soft. Instead, David showed that true strength sometimes means choosing not to use your power. Real leadership means being able to change course when you're presented with better wisdom. And genuine courage includes the bravery to admit when you're wrong. David's men watched their leader make this decision, and it probably taught them more about his character than any battle could have. They saw that he was a man who could control his anger, who valued wisdom over pride, and who cared more about doing right than looking strong. This moment also revealed why David would later be called a man after God's own heart. He was willing to listen to wisdom, even when it came from an unexpected source. He was humble enough to accept correction, even in the heat of anger. And he was secure enough in his own strength that he didn't need to prove it through violence. As David and his men turned back toward their camp, they were probably talking about what they had just witnessed. Their leader had been ready to lead them into battle, but when presented with a better way, he had chosen it without hesitation. And they were carrying with them not just the generous food that Abigail had provided, but something much more valuable: the knowledge that they followed a man who could be trusted to make the right choices even in difficult moments. Meanwhile, Abigail gathered her servants and began the journey back home. She had succeeded beyond her wildest hopes. Not only had she saved lives, but she had earned the respect and admiration of the future king of Israel. But her work wasn't finished yet. She still had to face her husband. When Abigail returned home, she found Nabal exactly where she expected him to be, drunk and celebrating at his feast. He was surrounded by guests, boasting about his wealth and importance, completely unaware that his foolish pride had nearly gotten everyone killed. Abigail made a wise decision. She didn't try to talk to her husband that night. When someone is drunk and surrounded by people they want to impress, it's not the time for serious conversations about life and death matters. Instead, she waited until morning. When Nabal was sober and alone, she told him everything that had happened. She explained how his insult to David had provoked an attack by 400 warriors. She described how she had taken food and gone to meet David personally, and she revealed how close they had all come to disaster. Nabal's reaction was shocking. When he heard what had happened, his heart failed him and he became like a stone. Some scholars think he had a stroke. Others believe it was a heart attack brought on by the shock of realizing how close he had come to death. For 10 days, Nabal lay paralyzed and unconscious. Then he died. When David heard the news, his response revealed his character once again. "Praise be to the Lord, who has upheld my cause against Nabal's insults and has kept his servant from doing wrong. The Lord has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head." David saw God's justice in what had happened. He had been tempted to take revenge into his own hands, but Abigail had stopped him. Now God had dealt with Nabal directly, and David's hands were clean. But the story doesn't end there. David did something that shows just how deeply impressed he had been with Abigail's character and wisdom. He sent messengers to her with a proposal of marriage. This wasn't just a romantic gesture. In that culture, a marriage proposal from someone like David was an offer of protection, status, and partnership. David was saying that he wanted this wise, courageous woman to be part of his life and future kingdom. Abigail's response was as gracious as everything else she had done. She accepted David's proposal with humility, even offering to wash the feet of his servants as a sign of respect. Soon after, she became David's wife. When David eventually became king of Israel, Abigail was there beside him as one of his queens. The woman who had stopped a war with a meal became part of the royal household that would rule Israel for decades. But what can we learn from this amazing story? What lessons does Abigail's courage and wisdom offer us today? First, we see the power of taking responsibility for problems we didn't create. Abigail hadn't insulted David's men. She hadn't made the decisions that led to the crisis. But she took responsibility for fixing the situation anyway. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is step up and solve problems, even when they're not our fault. Second, we learn about the importance of seeing the bigger picture. David was focused on his immediate anger and hurt pride. Nabal was focused on his immediate desire to look important in front of his guests. But Abigail could see beyond the moment to the long-term consequences. Her ability to think beyond the immediate crisis saved hundreds of lives. Third, we discover that generosity can be more powerful than force. Abigail didn't try to match David's military might with her own weapons. Instead, she brought food, respect, and wisdom. She met anger with understanding, insults with honor, and threats with gifts. Fourth, we see that courage isn't always about fighting. Abigail showed incredible bravery, but not the kind that involves swords and shields. She showed the courage to take risks for others, to speak truth to power, and to put herself in danger to save people who couldn't save themselves. Finally, we learn that words have tremendous power. Abigail's speech to David wasn't long, but every word was carefully chosen. She appealed to his better nature, reminded him of his destiny, and helped him see a better way forward. Her words literally stopped a war. These lessons are just as relevant today as they were 3,000 years ago. We still face conflicts that seem impossible to resolve. We still encounter people who let pride and anger drive their decisions. We still need people with the wisdom to see better solutions and the courage to act on them. In our modern world, it's easy to think that ancient stories have nothing to teach us. We have technology, global communication, and sophisticated systems for resolving disputes. What could a story about shepherds and sheep possibly tell us about dealing with 21st century problems? But here's the thing. Human nature hasn't changed much in 3,000 years. We still struggle with pride, anger, and the desire for revenge. We still make decisions based on emotion rather than wisdom. And we still need people who can step into difficult situations with courage, generosity, and the ability to see beyond the immediate crisis. Think about conflicts in your own life or in your community. How many of them escalate because someone feels disrespected or insulted? How many relationships are damaged because pride prevents people from backing down? How many situations spiral out of control because everyone is focused on being right rather than finding solutions? Abigail's story shows us that there's almost always a third option. When two sides are locked in conflict, when both feel justified in their anger, someone with wisdom and courage can often find a way forward that saves everyone's dignity while solving the real problem. Her approach worked because she understood something fundamental about human psychology. Most conflicts aren't really about the surface issues. They're about respect, recognition, and feeling valued. David wasn't really angry about not getting paid. He was angry about being insulted and dismissed. Nabal wasn't really protecting his wealth. He was trying to look important in front of his guests. Abigail addressed the real issues underneath the conflict. She gave David the respect he deserved, the recognition he craved, and the honor he had been denied. She did this not through empty flattery, but through generous actions and wise words. In today's world, we see this pattern everywhere. International conflicts that seem to be about territory or resources are often really about dignity and respect. Workplace disputes that appear to be about policies or procedures are frequently about feeling valued and heard. Family arguments that start over small issues usually reveal deeper needs for understanding and appreciation. The woman who stopped a war with a single meal shows us that the most powerful weapon against conflict is often the simplest one, treating people with the dignity and respect they crave. But Abigail's story also teaches us about the responsibility that comes with wisdom and privilege. She could have stayed safely at home and let others deal with the consequences of her husband's foolishness. She could have said it wasn't her problem to fix. Instead, she risked everything to save lives, including the lives of people who couldn't save themselves. This is a challenge for all of us. When we see conflicts escalating around us, when we witness injustice or cruelty, when we encounter situations where our intervention could make a difference, what do? Do we stay safely on the sidelines, or do we find the courage to act? Abigail's meal didn't just feed hungry soldiers. It fed their need for respect. It nourished their sense of justice. And it satisfied their leaders' hunger for wisdom over revenge. In a world that often seems divided, angry, and ready for conflict, we need more people like Abigail. People who can see past the immediate anger to the underlying needs. People who are willing to take risks to build bridges. People who understand that sometimes the most radical act is simple kindness. The woman who stopped a war with a single meal reminds us that peace is always possible, even when it seems impossible. That wisdom is stronger than weapons. That courage comes in many forms. And that sometimes The most important battles are won not by those who fight, but by those who have the wisdom and bravery to cook up a better solution. Her story lives on because it shows us something we desperately need to believe, that one person with courage and wisdom really can change everything.